If going completely fat-free isn't the answer, then what fats should we be eating, and why? And which ones should we be avoiding, and why are we avoiding them? If you already heard episode number 31, Alison's 140-pound weight loss, then you heard how she went completely fat-free for 10 years and the devastating effects that had on her health and what she had to do to recover her health. In this episode, we'll investigate the subject of fats a little bit more deeply, and we'll share what fats we use in our kitchens, why we use them, how we get them, and also a little bit about some of the fats we avoid, as well as the kind of shocking story on the origin of Crisco.
Welcome to the Ancestral Kitchen Podcast with Alison, a European town dweller in central Italy, and Andrea, living on a newly created family farm in Northwest Washington State, USA. Pull up a chair at the table and join us as we talk about eating, cooking, and living with ancient ancestral food wisdom in a modern world kitchen.
Hello, Andrea.
Hello, Alison. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I am good. Thank you for asking.
Oh, so I'm super excited because we have 3 new patrons since our last recording. Things are really ramping up on the Patreon community.
Thanks, guys.
I hope I pronounced all the names right. We have Mahala, Megan, but it has an A in it, so it may be Megan, and Adriana. 3 lovely ladies have come on. Our podcast is sponsored by you and the other patrons, so thank you very much. If you're interested in seeing what our community has to offer, you can go to patreon.com/ancestral kitchen podcast, which is great. I've also got a review to read today, which I'm just going to get up in front of me.
Okay.
There we go, which is from Apple Podcasts. We do ask for reviews on Apple Podcasts, but then we forget to go and look and see if anyone's left them. And we found some recently. This one's from, this one's quite a recent one. This one's from April. So last month, we're recording now, and it's May. And it's from someone called Dream Homesteader, and it's titled Found What I Was Looking For. And this person says, I couldn't stop listening to Ancestral Kitchen podcast for a couple of hours upon discovering it. Everything resonated with me so much. I had to go back and listen to the same episodes again, but this time with a notebook and pencil. I have recommended this podcast to my family and like-minded friends. You ladies are so inspiring. Keep doing your great work. Oh, how nice is that?
You can just tell we love the same things. Dream Homestead and when you find those people who are talking about the same things that are in your heart, it really resonates. So I know that feeling, finding that place. So I'm really glad to hear that we are that place for her or him.
That's kind of what we wanted when we started the podcast. I felt like there was a community out there somewhere of people who ate and felt and believed. And we're finding them.
We're not alone.
Yeah. Which is really awesome. So thank you for that review. And if you love what we're doing and you have a moment, please do give us a review on Apple Podcasts. There's the details of how to do that are in the show notes. So you can go there and look for those.
I guess it's super important and all these things, and we're supposed to ask all the time. We just don't know about that.
I know.
We don't know.
We're getting better. We're going to get even better, aren't we?
And we've got, for all the patrons and the new patrons, welcome. We've got some good stuff coming for you today. You'll hear about that in the episode.
Yeah. Thank you for reminding me about that. Have you had breakfast, Andrea?
Actually, I have not, but I can tell you what I'm going to make because it actually ties in really well with today's topic.
Okay.
So when I was staying with my friends down south this past week, then they told me what they usually make for breakfast on Sundays before church. And I thought, well, that sounds really good. So they cook their sausage and then they actually scoop in some cream cheese and melt it in. And then they beat their eggs and scramble them together. And so we made it while I was there. It was so good. Like eggs are just so creamy and delicious. And so our neighbors just gave us a container of sour cream. Cream cheese.
Yum.
So I'm going to
Okay.
try that today.
Wow. Cheese and eggs together really are very good,
Oh,
aren't they?
yeah.
Like just
Have you?
Rob used to make me something called special cheese on toast, which was grated cheese mixed in with egg and then plunked on some lovely bread and under the
Ew.
grill. It's delicious.
That sounds really good. I don't have any bread right now, but I would put this on bread for sure. That would be. She said that they often roll it up like in burritos, in a tortilla.
Okay. Yeah, it sounds delicious.
So you had lunch, and what did you have?
Yeah, I had lunch. I had leftover chicken. We cooked a whole chicken at the weekend.
Of course.
Which just puts me in mind of the episode we recorded a couple of goes back on the chicken, the whole chicken and nothing but the chicken. So
I love that
yeah,
one.
I've got a lot of leftover chicken in my fridge, which is just wonderful because I was able to pull some out and have some for lunch. And I had some sorghum with it that was cooked in chicken stock from the carcass and the head and the feet of that same chicken. And I had a bit of stock on the side to drink as well. And then I had some grated carrot and some chard, some red-stemmed chard with it as well. Simple and easy,
yum.
but delicious.
Yeah. Is chard in season where you're at right now?
Just about. Yeah, just about. They were really, really small leaves. And I had to ask at the market last Thursday, what's this? Because I wasn't sure if it was kind of spinach or what it was, because we're used to really big leaf chard, but these were really, quite dark, quite small leaves. But I was told it was bietola, which is chard. So
I wonder if they're growing it in a hoop house. I think you could have you could have chard out here right now if you were growing it in a hoop house.
Maybe.
That's
Tasted really
awesome.
good. It was a break from the cabbage because there's just so much cabbage, and it's just like, oh, can we have something a bit different from cabbage, please?
Yeah. Well, that's awesome.
It was very, very nice, and it
Delicious.
was lots and lots of fat on there, fat on the chicken skin, and fat on the sorghum, and that kind of leads us into today's episode, which is about fat. We've been wanting to do this one for ages, haven't we? We just, everyone asks us about fat. We've got so much to say about fat. And finally, we've got down to doing an episode on it, which I'm really pleased about.
Oh, I know this is one of the first episodes we ever discussed doing.
Yeah,
we just knew it was necessary and the time is right.
Exactly.
So here we are.
Exactly. So I wanted to start out with just a kind of a very brief overview of why fats are so important. And when I thought about that, I thought, well, for nutrition, for flavour, and for keeping us full, for satiation. And I also wanted to say that I'm sure that many people listening to this podcast know that fat doesn't make you fat. I spent most of my life thinking fat makes you fat until I realised, finding Nourishing Traditions and finding the ancestral way of eating, that I could eat fat and I wouldn't get fat, even though I have, if you've listened to our recent podcast about my weight loss, I have a really strong history of carrying too much weight. But fat does not make you fat. And fat gives us so many nutrients that aren't available other places, and so much flavour because it's a flavour carrier and it fills us up. Is there anything you want to add to why you think fats are so important, Andrea?
Well, they're a great energy source. So
yeah, didn't think about that.
They can be a nice fast one, especially if you're working outside or it's cold and you're metabolizing your energy faster. So
what fats do you use in your kitchen?
So I read your list and I was like, oh, we're the exact same. So we lard, tallow, butter.
Yeah.
We don't often have olive oil.
Okay.
It's just kind of more of a luxury treat. And there's also no olives around here. So we do sometimes have avocado oil.
Okay.
Maybe in this place where you would use olive oil. We don't have ghee very often. We do have it sometimes. We don't use a lot of coconut oil, maybe about a gallon a year. And we have cacao butter on hand also.
Okay, so we basically use very similar fats, with possibly the obvious difference that I live in Italy, and therefore there's olives everywhere. So extra virgin olive oil is a staple here. But we're both using lard and tallow, and some of those in my kitchen have been rendered specifically, and some of them are just left over from when I've cooked something and, the fat stripped off. We use butter, but not as much because it's more expensive. Sometimes I use ghee. I use cacao butter for the chocolate that I make, and just a little bit of coconut oil. I think probably about the same amount as you. I feel like because it's not local at all to me, it's not something that I want to engage with regularly at all in my kitchen. Whereas lard is very local. The tallow's local to me, the butter's local, and the olive oil's local.
Well, actually, now that we're talking about the coconut oil, I realize the majority of that quantity that I used, and I know how much we use just because I can review my purchase history on the company I buy the coconut oil from. Most of that went into candles, so we didn't even use it in the kitchen.
Oh wow! Okay. I've never made candles with coconut oil. You got me thinking now.
Yeah, it's
Gabe
a nice
will be really excited
pair
about that.
with beeswax because then your candles don't melt too quickly or too slowly.
Yeah.
It's a really perfect
I
pair.
shall store that for later. Thank you very much. So why do you use those fats in your kitchen? Those particular ones that you listed?
Oh, wait. Sorry, an alarm went off over here and I had to figure out which one it was. Can you say that again?
Why do you use those fats in your kitchen?
Well, they're available. Lard and tallow. I have really generous friends, the ones that we like to butcher with. And like with the lard, when we get our hog from our friends, they butcher for other people too. And the other people don't want the lard. So we just end up with a lot. I know you and me are both like, man, we end up with a lot of lard. And the tallow, when our friends butcher, they'll do a couple cows, and it's just us and them and, a couple of families using the meat. So nobody else wants the tallow other than her and me. So the program we came up with last year was she brought me big cases of the frozen chunks of tallow, and I rendered it all down and then divided it between her and me. So, she got her tallow rendered and I got my tallow for free. So everybody was happy.
Yeah, that sounds really
cool.
And
then, butter. Well, we've been making a lot of butter right now because this cow, Elsie, she's producing a lot of cream. So
and she's a Jersey, isn't she? Your cow?
Yeah. So make hay when the sun shines. So we're making butter, and she'll be dried up soon this month. So that source will stop.
Okay.
But then she'll have her baby in the summer. So then the source will return. So I just want to have a lot of butter on hand to get us through.
Yeah. So you're using really what's local around you, which is what our ancestors would have done for the majority of history, because that's all that would have been available.
Right. They didn't have much of a choice.
I think that for me, my choice is dictated by what's around me just as much as that. We render our lard from local pigs, we render our tallow from local cow fat, and the olive oil is around us, definitely. I think as opposed to using other fats, because there are a lot of other fats on the market that one could choose to cook with, I feel that the fats that we use are, in quotes, natural, in that our ancestors have adapted, eating them, have changed eating them, have grown eating them. They are natural fats. They're what humans are used to. In the kitchen, I like them because they have high smoking points. That's often why I would choose ghee over butter, because it's got a higher smoking point, and they don't degrade while they're cooking. So whereas other oils that you might use have lower smoking points or have problems when they're heating and produce things, anti-nutrients that are bad for you, then these particular fats don't. And the taste are really good. I mean, I love the taste of them, and I can get them locally. So that's why I use those fats in my kitchen as well. Yeah. I wanted to talk for a bit, and I'm excited to see to talk about the book that you've got there, about the fats that we don't use in our kitchen, because, we can list all these fats that we use, and we will later on talk about how we use them. But there's a very definite fats we don't use in that assertion as well. And so for me, any other liquid fat other than extra virgin olive oil, and when I'm looking for extra virgin olive oil, I will look for a phrase in Europe for sure on the labels. It has to say it's been extracted by mechanical means, i.e. they've used machinery to take that oil out, not chemicals. So I would always look for that on a label, and I would always use extra virgin olive oil. Any other oil apart from that, so that is any other form of vegetable oil, I don't use in my kitchen, whether that be a semi-solid vegetable oil like a margarine, or whether that be a liquid oil like sunflower oil, sesame oil, almond oil. I don't use any of those. I know you can get low cold-pressed sunflower oil that's very expensive, but I haven't used it. I mean, it could be used to drizzle on salads, but it's just something that I don't use. Are you the same?
Yeah. I mean, I haven't even found any sunflower oil that I could buy, although I haven't really looked either, but I know that it does exist. But again, it, like you said, it just doesn't come to the top of my needs list. It's worth saying that I didn't used to use these fats. I actually can remember the first time I bought lard. So I basically grew up using canola oil or vegetable oil and stuff, and I never even thought about what it was or what I was using. Never even really crossed my mind. And then when we started eating, trying to find better food, organic food, local food, you really quickly figure out there's nobody at the farmer's market selling canola oil. So it just kind of started that investigation, and I am grateful, of course, going to mention Sally Fallon for her book Nourishing Traditions, because it was really helpful for me. That was probably one of my first exposures, if not the first exposure I had to, well, maybe some blogs had mentioned it, but
I'm trying to think when I started using lard now. You've made me sit here and think, because I'm totally obsessed with lard now, as you know.
Yeah, you are.
And I don't remember my first encounter with lard. I don't remember it. But I do remember that as a child, I mean, there was no lard in my kitchen. There was no tallow in my parents' kitchen.
No.
There was not even any olive oil. It was vegetable oil. Absolutely, 100%.
Which is such a weird name if you think about it. I always was like, I didn't know vegetables had fat in them, but I guess they do.
Yeah.
What do I know? So that actually kind of brings us, I'm going to just briefly mention this book. And then for those of you like me who geek out on food history, I'm going to spend a little bit more time. I'm actually making a video for you patrons. So the video and the audio will go up on the podcast for the patron feed, and you guys can hear more about this if you want to. But Crisco is a brand of cottonseed oil, and I don't know if it's is it in Europe too, or is it just, I don't know if it's worldwide or just in the US.
No, the brand is a US brand, I think. Yeah.
Okay. Or I mean, I know it's a US made brand. I didn't know if it was just sold over here. So you might recognize the name William Procter and James Gamble. If you live in the US, you're probably familiar with the company Procter and Gamble. That's the guys who started it. So Procter and Gamble were candle and soap makers, and you use lard to make candles. So we're talking like the late 1800s that they were doing this. You use lard to make candles and soap. And then they were trying to figure out a cheaper way to make candles and soap. And they found that cottonseed was a booming crop in these late 1800s era, but the seeds just spoil. I've tried saving them before. When I was a kid, we picked cotton and it just like all sprouts or goes rancid. It's so weird. But anyways, in 1911, they tried extracting oil from it, but it also turned rancid very fast. So then they hydrogenated it, and it actually looked like lard, like it was white, and it was like scoopable, kind of firm. So Procter and Gamble thought, okay, we could use this. This is cheaper, and it's a waste product. So it's just, it's like buying somebody's trash, right? Nobody really wants it, so the price is low. So they thought, okay, we'll use that to make the candles. So they bleached and emulsified and deodorized it to make their candles. And then, hello, the 1900s, electricity came on the market. Nobody wanted to buy candles anymore, or they still buy candles, but it was not, a necessary item. So they looked at their lard replacement and they're like, well, it looks like lard, so let's sell it for food. So they actually spent more money on their Crisco marketing campaign than any marketing campaign had spent up until that time at any point. So they tied it in with everybody wanted to hear the word science. Science was very much becoming the name of the day, like, well, scientific or sanitary. It's sanitary, that was very much the name of the game. So I have in my hand, you might say, well, that's hearsay, Andrea, but I hearsay it from Crisco themselves, and it's in a bunch of other places. You can just look it up online. And Sally Fallon talks about it in detail in her book, Nourishing Fats. And then also I have this book from 1913 written by the Procter & Gamble Co. And they also share their story, kind of a purified version. They don't say this was a waste product and now we're selling it to you as food. They just say, look how sanitary this is. It's interesting to me, Alison.
I've seen that book.
Yeah,
you sent me photos of it, and I was absolutely astounded. I mean, to start with, there's like 600 and something recipes in there, so they were obviously trying to make it a book that stayed on people's shelves.
Yeah,
and
well, it did.
The marketing speak in it. I mean, it's so easy to see with hindsight what was being done. What in techniques were being employed, but the words that are used, the drawings that are put in it, the way it just pulls on all of the strings of the people who would have been making food decisions back then about economy.
Yeah.
It's cheaper than lard, and they talk about it being more sanitary than lard. Do you want to read some?
Yeah, just a short paragraph that I feel
it blew my mind looking
summarize
at that book.
now that I've told you why they came up with this, and then hear this paragraph of how they marketed it. Great foresight was shown in the making of Crisco. And I'll add, by the way, if you're a patron member, I took pictures of this entire section I'm about to read. It's called The Story of Crisco, and it's shared for the patrons in a patron document. So you guys can go in and download that and read it, the whole thing, if you want. Great foresight was shown in the making of Crisco. The quality as well as the quantity of lard was diminishing steadily in the face of a growing population. Prices were rising. The high cost of living was an oft-repeated phrase. Also, our country was outgrowing its supply of butter. What was needed, therefore, was not a substitute, but something better than these fats, some product which could not only accomplish as much in cookery, but a great deal more.
It's crazy, I've been reading Defending Beef, and in that book, Nicolette Harm-Neiman goes into trans fats to quite a deep level. And of course, Crisco, because it's hydrogenated, is a trans fat. And she basically says, that goodness knows how many thousands of people have been given health problems because of the fact that hydrogenated fat was marketed to people and sold as an alternative to ancestral fats. And, with that in my mind, reading that book, and the patrons will see when we're doing a video where we'll flick through it. It's just, it kind of makes me wonder, well, I'm seeing that with hindsight. So what else is in the soup around me now? Marketing technique as a science has come on somewhat in the last century. What soup are we in now? What's being marketed to us now? Because I look at that book and I think, my gosh, the health issues and the travesty that is and was trans fats, and it's made out to be something amazing.
Yeah. Oof. Some of the recipes in this book actually are good. Just got to trade Crisco back to lard. They're just old recipes, and then they just swapped out whenever it would have said lard, they just put in Crisco. So I actually also typed some of those recipes up in a document for the patrons, so you guys can download those recipes if you want to make them.
I'm going to have a go at those with lard, obviously. So Crisco is it's not a food. It wasn't originally even intended to be a food.
It was never meant to be one.
And it's not a food. It's not that, and also the other vegetable oils that we were talking about, that I said the only liquid oil that I use in my kitchen is extra virgin olive oil. Those other oils aren't stable at high temperatures. That's another reason why we don't use them. And a lot of those other oils have polyunsaturated fatty acids in, which is something that we don't want to have too many of in our diet. A lot of those oils are also high in omega-6s, and we all know about the balance that we're supposed to have between omega-3 and omega-6. And, just to hear how it's not just a matter of sunflower oil. This is something that a company took that was a waste product from cotton and then did something to it scientifically to make it like lard, and then literally paid more money than any marketing campaign ever before to hoodwink people who literally they didn't know any better. And it just it makes me quite angry.
I noticed. I've said it before, and I stand by my statement that I honestly think that food marketers are the most brilliant marketers in the world. I really do. I think they are like the genius and the best and the brightest minds, and I wish that they could be put to better use. But,
oh my gosh, imagine that. They're brilliant. I mean, the way that they study populations and get into our minds. And there was another brand that was popular in the US called Spry, and I'll share those in the Patreon document too. Because you've actually got a marketing book from Spry as well, which I've seen, who had a kind of an Aunt Jenny character to say how old-fashioned lard was and how fabulous this new Spry cooking oil was.
Yeah. But Jenny's the bridge, right? Like she's still sort of like the cozy, plump, old-fashioned aunt, right? So she's making you feel safe. And you know that marketers say if there's a name on a brand, then people are more likely to buy it. So like all this stuff was just being studied and understood at this time, and it was used to sell a product. And I don't necessarily know. I'm not saying Procter and Gamble were out there like, let's kill people with trans fats. I think they're just like, this is cheaper, and oh my gosh, look how much money we can make on it. But here's where we ended up. So.
And canola oil that you mentioned before is really similar in its story to Crisco, in that was a waste product after World War II ended. And so again, some scientific chemical process was done to it, the rapeseed oil that was used to make it fit for consumption. And then it was marketed as canola oil. And just the amount of the statistics that show how much people swapped from animal fat to these fats, and how fats like these, now trans fats are banned in the US, but other vegetable oil fats are used everywhere, absolutely everywhere. And it's astounding to think how in literally just a few generations, we've gone from ancestral fats that have been used for millennia, literally, since humans have been rearing pigs, which I think they were domesticated 8,500 BC.
It was a long time ago.
So we've been coexisting with lard since then. And yet in the last few generations, we've turned away from those fats, and virtually, I don't know what percentage, but a very, very, very large percentage of the population is using vegetable oils that we have never eaten for the rest of our history. It's bonkers.
So weird. It's weird.
Yeah. And it's not good.
The power of marketing.
Yeah. Exactly.
Power of marketing. They say it only takes
we need to get enough patrons so we can get those marketers on our side.
That only takes 2 generations or something to completely change foundational ideas, because you have, whenever this came out in 1913, grandma's probably like, "You're kidding me. I love my lard. I'm going to eat my lard," you know? And then mom's like, "Oh, I don't know. Maybe that's better for you." And the kids are like, "Oh, you're so old fashioned. I'm going to use Crisco." You know? So
I hope that in some places it's coming back round, certainly in the household. I know that people that I've spoken to who listen to the podcast who have sent me recipes and said, you know, my grandma lived in Italy and she used to make this bread with lard. And then when she moved to the States, her daughter took it on. That was my mum, for example, and she changed to Crisco. And now she's passed the recipe to me, and I'm thinking of going back to lard. So in some households, you know, the ones that listen to this podcast, maybe the circle's turning back around, and that feels good. But yeah, like in that Crisco booklet, recipes that used lard, it was just swapped up for Crisco. And I've seen that and heard that from people, well, how that actually happened in their own homes, you know.
We have the best listeners. They eat such good food. I want everything that they take pictures of. I'm like, why can't we just try it? It looks so good.
A massive potluck.
Oh my gosh, Kathy's bread, the salt bread. I was like, I want that.
Yeah, I saw that.
All right, so
let's talk about the good fats now. And
let's put our attention on the good guys.
You came up with a really good kind of mental bridge for understanding what a good fat is. So talk about that.
Yeah, a good rule of thumb that I just lodged in my mind sometime back when I started learning about fats was a way to know what a good fat is it's a fat you could raise and produce at home. And the production method used to prepare the fat is one you could do in your own home. Those are signs of a good, nourishing fat. I'm sure that there's exceptions to the rule, you know, like there's some great fat you could, like I don't have an olive press, but technically I could press olive oil at home if I, you know, really wanted to, and it's something I could raise. The hydrogenation, the bleaching, the sanitizing, you know, all this other stuff is a process that I couldn't replicate here. Not like that I know of anyways, but
yeah, that makes sense. I can't do the olive oil in my own home, but I could go to a local kind of cooperative and have my olives crushed with other people's olives. So everything else, all the other fats, I could do it at home. And you're making butter there. We're both making lard and tallow. So
and I think it also is worth saying, and this is where PUFAs can come into the conversation a little bit, is that the degree to which the difficulty of raising, making, and storing the fat indicates the degree to which it should be in your diet. So the more difficult it is to raise and produce and store, probably the less quantity should turn up in a natural diet. And then the easier it is, you know, lard, you can literally make it and store it on the shelf. That's probably one you should use more of. So
that makes sense too. Let's talk about lard then, because I like talking about lard. Yeah, let's talk about lard. Okay, so here in my house, we buy pig back fat from Flavio, my farmer, and then we render it ourselves. And we usually do that once every 6 weeks, I would say. We chop the fat up, and then we put the slow cooker on, and we put the fat in the slow cooker, and we leave it. And it takes all day. Maybe at the beginning, after 3 hours, we take all the bits of fat out and we drain what's in the slow cooker through a sieve into a metal bowl, and then we put everything back in, and then we do that at maybe 1 to 2 hour intervals for about 8 hours. And then at the end of that, we have beautiful liquid lard, which we let cool and then decant into containers. And then we have the cracklings left, and we will eat the lard. That lard will last us 6 weeks. We will use it to fry literally virtually everything in my kitchen is fried with lard. Yeah. To spread on bread, which I don't know if outside of England, whether people have always done that, but that's a particularly English tradition, lard on toast with some salt.
Oh, okay.
So we spread lard on our bread. I put lard in my baked goods. And then the bits that are left over, the cracklings, I will use as well. So I put those in bread. I sometimes fry them up till they're really crispy, and we'll put them on our dinner. I will also often use the skin from the fat to crunch up, which is absolutely delicious. If there's any fat that's left on my in the bottom of my pan when I'm roasting something like a belly joint or a shoulder of pork, then if I'm not making a gravy and using that, I will pour that into a little cup and leave that in the fridge, and then I really enjoy that on my bread because it's got kind of bits of dripping in the bottom.
Mm-hmm.
And in addition, I also make cured pig fat. So in Italy, that's called lardo. And I've done that wet cured and dry cured. And then I would use that sliced and eat it raw, or put it on pizzas, put it in dishes. And that's got a more salty flavour because it's been cured, as long with kind of rosemary and juniper and other aromatics on it. And yeah, really, lard is, I would say, 70% of the fat that I use in my kitchen is lard, I would say.
Okay.
How do you do your lard? You said you rendered the tallow from the frozen.
Yeah, that sounds like we do it basically the same. A couple times we've tried running the lard chunks through a meat grinder before we render it, which is nice because it renders so quickly and so perfectly and so clearly. So that's probably the only difference between our processes is we've tried that a few times.
I did that once, and it kind of didn't go with our process because when I picked the bits of fat out of the slow cooker in order to get rid of the liquid, they kind of got stuck in the sieve that I was using. Oh. And then I found it hard to get them back in. So I think maybe if I'd used a muslin to strain them through, perhaps it would have worked better. But because of that, I just went back to saying, oh no, let's chop them up, even though it's more work.
Yeah. I think it just depends on, we don't actually have our own meat grinder. We just borrow one from a friend. If you have one handy, that determines whether or not we'll grind the fat. And then also how much you're doing. If you're doing 100 pounds, then it's kind of nice to have it ground up so it can go quicker. But if you're doing a smaller amount, 5 pounds, I wouldn't bother.
And do you do that have you done that with beef fat as well to make tallow?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, it works also.
So what do you do with your lard?
Gosh, well, what don't you do with lard?
What don't you do?
Well,
yeah. Maybe I should ask that.
Well, for the American audience, I would say whatever you grew up doing with Crisco. So, you can fry donuts in it. If that doesn't sell you on lard, I don't know what will. You can, we just keep a little jar. I actually keep mine in the fridge most of the time, but if it's a small jar, I keep it on the counter. But you put it on the pan and fry your eggs in it, or grease your cast iron pans with it in between making
me too.
Aaron's awesome injera
pancakes
pattern thingy that he taught us. Just use it anytime I don't know. People always ask me, what do you use lard for? And I'm like, I don't know.
Everything.
Whatever you use fat for, I don't know.
I use it to grease my tins when I make bread.
Yeah, grease your tins with it.
As well.
You can grease the axle joints on your wagon, or if you have a wagon. Well, I don't.
No, nor do
I. But I remember that Karima mentioned that in Chewing the Fat, and then Flora Thompson mentioned it in Lark Rise to Candleford. They both emphasized, of course, we use the fat in the kitchen, but it's also what the men used for greasing their boots to make the leather last longer, and their belts and their things like that, and use it on the wooden cutting boards and wooden tools, which we do that because we have a lot of wooden tools. So you can grease your wooden tools with it. There's lots of uses. And you can
keep our lard in the freezer, some of it. So when we do a 6-week batch of lard rendering, I will keep maybe 1 or 2 of those, of the maybe 6 or 7 containers that I get, in the fridge, and then I will put the rest of it in the freezer, and it freezes absolutely fine. It defrosts much quicker than non-fatty substances. So if you get it out, you can usually use it within half an hour. And so you can just keep it in the fridge for a very, very long time and not have to worry about it at all.
Yeah, I should have said that for the long term. We put the lard in the freezer, and then I just take a pint out and put it in the fridge.
Yeah. Yeah, that's kind of similar to us.
Yeah, and lard and tallow can be used for candles and soap, as we already kind of referred to earlier. So if somebody wants to do that, go for it.
Yeah, we have a chat with Ellie from Ellie's Everyday on the Patreon from quite a while ago, where she talks about soap making. So if you're interested in that, we did have a discussion about using lard and tallow in soaps as part of that conversation. Yeah. So go back.
She's emphatic about using the fat that you have locally to make your soap and candles, and that's how she makes her formulas. She said, so that you can use the fat you have around you, and be able to use her recipe for whatever fat you have, because that is logical.
So talking about the fat we have around us, let me talk about olive oil for a little bit, because we are totally blessed to have this literally everywhere around us. And the first thing that I remembered when I came to Italy and tasted freshly pressed olive oil was that it was a completely different foodstuff, a completely different product to the supermarket oil that I tasted in the past. And I'm not just talking about, rubbish, not extra virgin olive oil that you can buy that's been chemically created and sits in someone's cupboard for 6 months. I'm talking about good, reasonably good olive oil that you could buy in a supermarket in the UK where I grew up. And when we first came to Italy, a friend had some olive trees and gave us a bottle of this freshly pressed olive oil, and it was green and it was misty. And I was like, this is a bit strange. And it was so fiery and peppery. I'd really never tasted anything like it. And I couldn't use much of it. I couldn't literally pour it over my food because it was so flavoursome. And I think a lot of people, olive oil's just been adulterated in many, many places and is made very cheaply for a lot of brands. And it doesn't bear any relation, I don't think, to proper freshly pressed olive oil, which the people who had olives, our ancestors who had olives, would have been tasting and would have been ingesting. And I feel that, the nutrition must shadow that difference in flavour, in that I bet the nutritional profile of that olive oil, the freshly pressed olive oil that I first tasted, was incredibly different to the chemically processed olive oil that I, had in the UK before, that's very, very cheap. And I feel like it's interesting because people who've listened to the interview we did with Karima, I've had my opinion about Italians and olive oil change quite radically in the last 6 months, in that I always thought that Italians had been using olive oil throughout their country for centuries for everything. And reading Karima's book, Chewing the Fat, has opened my eyes, and now I know that Italians have been using lard for centuries. Some Italians have been using extra virgin olive oil when they had olives growing around them. But in the past, before olive oil was offered as an alternative to saturated fat in the 1950s and 60s, not many Italians had olive oil. So I remember before that wondering about cooking with olive oil and how could these Italians who've been using olive oil for centuries be the healthiest people in the world, and yet they fry loads of things. How could they fry in olive oil? You're not supposed to fry in olive oil. And I remember listening to a Ben Greenfield podcast where he was interviewing an olive oil, a guy who owned an olive oil import company, who said that the polyphenols in extra virgin olive oil, because they're so high, they protect you from the antioxidants. And I thought,
the antioxidants or the oxidants?
The oxidants, sorry. So they become like an antioxidant. So I meant to say that. And I did do some research at the time and found stats to back that up. Although that and the interview were from people who were trying to sell olive oil, so I'm not sure I'm 100% convinced. But what I will say is that Italians haven't been frying in olive oil for centuries and centuries. They've been frying in lard. But also, Italians use olive oil as a dressing very, very often, more so than they fry in it. So they will put it on salads, they will dress vegetables on it, they will put fresh oil on slices of bread, they will put it on their food, not cook with it. And that's generally what we do now. Now we're using lard as 70% of the fat in our kitchen. We will use that olive oil, that beautiful tasting olive oil, to go on our salads. And I will put it on greens. I will often put it on cabbage a lot this winter to brighten cabbage up. And I will drizzle it over some cooked grains. And that's the main way that I use extra virgin olive oil in my kitchen. Sometimes I fry in it, but since we've had such a beautiful, bountiful supply of lard, I rarely do that anymore. I feel like that feels like the right use of that oil in my kitchen. Totally. I don't want to fry with it because I prefer the solidity of lard. I know that the smoking point of lard is higher. I know that I feel happy about how historically it interacts with heat, and I just feel happier than using olive oil. And for us, lard is cheaper than olive oil, even though olive oil's much cheaper here than it is in the UK. Lard is still much, much cheaper. And so I'll use that.
Yeah, I love that. And it sounds like you're more similar to, it's not really Karima's opinion about olive oil. Her opinion about it doesn't really matter. Neither does yours and mine. But the narratives that were shared with her is what we look at for that historical information. And it sounds like there was some women in Italy at that time who lived regionally close to where olives were grown abundantly and had access to some olive oil. But it sounds like they still used it more similarly to how you're saying, as a dressing. And then there's other women who lived farther away, different regions, and they either never had it, or like that one woman with the bottle that the soldiers tipped over, and she was like, what, are we supposed to lick it off the floor?
Yeah.
It was so precious.
Precious.
Yeah. Oh, that's cool.
So you don't have extra virgin olive oil there at all?
No, I haven't. We haven't had any in a long time, just because I don't even know how. I don't even know how to know if it's good. You know what I mean? I'm like, I don't know. I feel like at that price, if I see olive oil, I'm like, that seems awfully cheap. I feel like that can't really be good olive oil. And I want that oil that you're describing, that fresh, clearish, greenish, misty, flavorful. And so since that's what I want, that's what I have in my head, then I don't know. When you see olive oil pour out and it's like thick and you're like, I feel like that's canola oil.
Yeah. Not good.
So I don't want that.
So talk about butter then. Talk to us about how you use butter in your kitchen.
Well, we use butter a lot for a lot of things. It's in a lot of the things that I bake with. We put butter on bread, toast. There you go.
Is your butter salted, isn't it?
I like the salt butter. Yeah. So I both buy butter, and we make butter. So, Katie made us a bunch the other day. It was really awesome. And when we were gone all week, she just skimmed the cream off all the milk and made it all into butter. And she did not salt it. So I like it either way. If you're trying to keep it in your fridge for longer, then you can salt it. But if you're planning to use a whole, she froze them in balls, so you're planning to use a whole kind of ball of butter at a time, then there's really you don't need to salt it because you're not trying to preserve it. So
is your homemade butter, does it taste really different to the store one or not?
Well, the butter we buy is pretty good. It's from a farm where the cows mostly just feast on grass most of the time. And their butter looks very similar to the butter we make at home. And their butter's quite flavorful. So, but if you were going to get butter at the grocery store, it would not be the same.
Yeah.
So I guess it depends on what butter you're buying.
I think
Our
that's
butter's pretty dark.
something that I made a note to talk about that you've just said, which is think about what the animal that's producing the fat that you're using is being fed. And that's kind
and
of
what its
absolutely
exposure
vital.
to sunlight is. And that's really important.
Because we
and
know...
even its social life, does it have like a normal herd social life and all of that. It all feeds into the health. I mean, look at a human and just think about the things that affect you. And if you have a horrible social life and things are terrible, and then, you're just not as healthy.
We're back to the know your farmer, really, which is the way to know the answer to those things. I mean, because...
Or trust your middleman, one or the other.
With butter, I know that Sally Fallon and the Western Price Association talk a lot about the difference between cows that are eating grass and cows that aren't eating grass and what that imparts to the butter. But that's the same, if you're making tallow from a cow. And then with pigs, it's really important to be aware of what that pig is being fed, because that's coming through into the fat that you're going to render potentially in your kitchen and eat yourself. If pigs and other animals are fed grains that they are not adapted to be eating, and they're potentially fed polyunsaturated fatty acids, then the pig is going to put that on their fat that you're going to have. And so that's a very, very big consideration in all of the fats, I think, all the animal fats we're talking about.
Yeah, Kate Deering mentions it in her book, How to Heal Your Metabolism. I didn't bring that book down here, so I can't quote her directly, but she did talk about how it frustrates her that there will be studies saying eggs are good for this or bad for that. And she said, they never tell you what kind of egg.
Yeah.
And in her opinion, and mine also, an egg from a chicken in a factory where there's, 4 chickens living in a box the size of a piece, like a sheet of, copy paper, being fed unfermented and, just soy or whatever, that's going to produce a different product than a chicken that's, scratching and pecking and eating something that it can actually digest in its non-ruminant little digestive tract.
Totally.
And she did say that chickens that are fed a diet high in polyunsaturated fatty acids tend to produce, they do produce, their meat, their fat is higher in the PUFAs as well.
Yeah.
And so it's a different product.
Yeah,
which,
completely.
Somebody can have their opinion on which one they prefer. That's fine. I'm just saying it's a different product. It's 2 different things.
It's like saying, I have to go back to defending beef because that's what I'm reading at the moment. It's like saying that beef is the problem of everything in our food system. And then look at the difference between industrialized beef that's, jabbed with injections all its life and fed goodness knows what, compared to a cow that's in a field that can be used for nothing other than growing grass that's out in the air. It's just... they're different foods.
Well, when you read this Crisco book, something that I took note of right off, and I'm really interested to see what our listeners take note of whenever they read the story of Crisco, the snapshots I took from the book. But something that I took note of right off the bat was fat itself is not demonized in this book. Fat wasn't considered bad at this point. They're like, oh, we need fat, but how to get fat that we can afford? I know, Crisco. So the thought that came to me was, then the next generation, started saying, gosh, fat seems like it's actually really bad for you. We're noticing bad effects from eating fat because they're all eating processed fats.
Yeah.
More processed fats, and it was becoming even more prevalent in the diet, and then moving less to boot. And so then the solution was whiplash, no fat at all.
Yeah.
And now we're starting to come back into, hold up. That seems like a really bad idea. Did you know your brain can't function without fat? Okay, let's put some fat back in our diet, but let's make it the good one.
Because the answer is nuanced, as it always is. It's never clear and simple.
Why?
Let's go back to the last few fats on our list. So I was just going to say that I use ghee to fry with more than butter because I know it's got a much higher smoking point. And I also use it sometimes when I want a treat, because I don't use butter that often. Sometimes, when, for instance, if I have a pancake, I'm just really in a kind of a buttery mood, and I'll fry my pancake in ghee.
Course.
Sometimes I put some ghee in my cacao husk tea that I drink, and so it just rounds the flavour a bit.
Yeah.
And it's beautiful. Coconut oil, like you, we don't use it very much. I do like it with sweet potato, so sometimes I'll put it on that. And I also use it 50-50 with cacao butter in the chocolate that I make. I used to use it to fry pancakes before we had a regular supply of lard, but I know that it's got a lower smoke point than lard because I used to struggle with my cast iron pan and the coconut oil in it. It would start smoking at the temperature that I wanted to have it at. I made a note of the smoking points for the different fats because I know I've always tried to kind of have it on hand because I always think which is the highest, which is not. And I wanted to just read through them so people could understand. So tallow smokes at 205 centigrade, which is 400 Fahrenheit. So that's really high. Ghee's higher than that at 230 C, 450 F. Lard is 180.
Oh, ghee.
Ghee.
Sorry.
Yeah, that's why ghee's so fabulous to fry with. After that, the next one down is duck fat and chicken fat, which my sources say 190 C, 375 F. And then lard is 185 C, 370 F. Extra virgin olive oil has a big range, so from 165 to 190 C, 325 to 375 F, and I think that depends on the polyphenols possibly in it. And then butters at the bottom at 175 C, 350 F of the main fats that we use.
And it's good to know that bad things can happen to your fat even before it smokes. So I know people always... I first learned that with grapeseed oil when everybody said, oh, it has such a high smoke point. And then I was reading about it and I was like, well, it has a high smoke point, but it actually, I believe it starts turning into free radicals before it even smokes.
Wow.
So that's something to be aware of as well. I mean, if you're frying in tallow and lard, you're good. Like, you're fine. Don't worry about anything.
Enjoy it.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. We didn't really talk about duck fat and chicken fat because those are not something those are more incidental for us. You know, we're cooking a bunch of duck or fat or chicken or something, and then we just skim it off and use the jar within the week. So, yeah.
And I love chicken fat spread on bread. I love to save the fat that's in the bottom of a roast chicken and then let it sort of set in the fridge and spread it on my toast or my bread. It's absolutely delicious.
So good. I especially love it when it's from roasting some chickens or any bird. I like to put butter on top of them when they're roasting. Because then when I skim off, it's like schmaltz plus butter, but it also has all the herbs that I cooked it with. And we just pick the herbs right out of the yard. So they're like really good. And then I strain it and you have this herbed butter schmaltz mix. It's like, what?
That sounds delicious.
So good. Yeah.
Did you want to talk about kids and fats before? Because I'm seeing we're kind of at time, and I think we've got to have some other episodes on fat separately because I feel like we've literally just scratched the surface of fat.
This is the intro. We'll go deeper on another one.
Yeah, exactly. What did you want to say about kids and fats?
So Sally Fallon, I think it's worth mentioning just because low fat is such a idea that we have, but it's so, so important for children. Also for pregnant and breastfeeding women. Also people who want to have babies one day. So I think we're recognizing now that if we don't have fats in our diet, you actually can become, infertile. So, excuse me, in Sally Fallon's book, Nourishing Fats, Alison, we're talking about this for an hour and there's like an entire book on it. Like it's, 250 pages long. So you see what we mean when we're saying we're barely scratching the surface.
Yeah.
Weston A. Price, who everybody probably knows this by now, he was a a dentist, and he went around and looked at people's teeth all around the world. Let me try to find the place that I noted. He noted that all these groups, hold on, I keep losing my place.
Okay.
He studied so-called primitive peoples during the 1930s and 40s. He noted that all these groups valued one or more sacred foods considered important for men and women to consume at least 6 months before conception, for women during pregnancy and lactation, and for children during growth. In Switzerland, so every culture had these something, and you see that sacred food it wasn't based on the marketing campaign or, what was imported to Whole Foods. It was based on what they had around them and what they observed worked. So in Switzerland, that food was a deep, yellow, nutrient-dense butter from cows eating rapidly growing spring grass. In the Outer Hebrides, did I say that right? The sacred food was fish heads stuffed with oats and chopped cod's liver. For many groups, the sacred food was fish eggs. For others, it was liver. South Sea Islanders of both sexes consumed the oil from fermented shark livers for a period before conception. When Dr. Price asked the various groups why they consumed that particular food, the answer was always the same: so we can have healthy babies. The sacred foods had this in common. They were nutrient-dense animal foods with particularly high levels of fat-soluble vitamins A, D, and K2, and especially vitamin A. I thought that was interesting. Just talking about how important it is. And when you talked about defending beef and you said, where did the cow live and all of that, the vitamin D and the vitamin A that you get from your tallow and lard is so important. But it doesn't really, it happens because the animal's, standing in the sun and eating food that stood in the sun and converting it into something
doing what it does naturally, and that plant was doing what it does. I think that fertility edge to fat is so important, and it kind of fits in with my story in that we've talked about this before in the podcast, that I was without a cycle for 5 years, and I was very, very, very fat phobic, and then coming to learn about what traditional cultures had used as fertility foods through the generations, and realizing that they were animal fats, and that fat was a huge part of what I needed to re-embrace if I wanted to bring back my cycle and become a mother. And I actually, that happened to me. I re-embraced fat. It wasn't pretty, but I did. And I credit re-embracing fat with bringing back my cycle and allowing me to conceive. And so I think there's so much wisdom in that this kind of fat phobic society that we've lived in goes hand in hand with fertility problems. Obviously, it's not the only reason. There are many things that are wrong with our health and society. But I think that fat is an important one of those. And for me personally, I'd vouch for it as a very important part of staying fertile and preparing for a baby, for sure.
Lexi pointed something interesting out on her podcast where she said that she ends up talking to a lot of women who are facing infertility, and she said that more often than not, when they talk to a doctor, they get one of two answers, one of which is, like, I guess you'll just never have children, which is what they told you. And the other is, well, you could try this treatment. But nobody, there's somebody out there, but by and large, they're not saying, have you tried butter? So that there was that footnote on page 140 in Nourishing Fats where the author said, no one has looked at the effect of low-fat dairy on fertility starting at age 2, as government agencies recommend. The odds are that infertility due to lifelong fat starvation, which is what most girls today engage in, will not be so easily reversed by a temporary return to high-fat dairy foods. So they were talking about, like, people saying, oh, maybe you should just eat fat when you're trying to get pregnant or something. But they're saying this is an entire body system that needs to be healed and nourished, and not just a short-term, get pregnant quick scheme.
Yeah, no, I agree. I wish that I'd found the information that I did many years before I did. But we all have our journeys.
Grateful you found it when you did.
Yeah, exactly.
You have
Very
Gabriel
much
now.
So. Yeah, exactly. What else was I going to say? I was going to say that we should do a separate episode on fertility, because it's something that is close to both of our hearts. And,
Definitely.
fats play into that. And I know that there are a lot of good people out there who are helping with ancestral diets and their role in fertility. So we should certainly look at doing a separate episode on that.
Yeah.
Is there anything else you want to talk to regarding fats before we close?
I think we covered a lot. On cacao butter, another little tip I learned from Lexi, she gets the little cacao butter pastilles from Azure Standard. And when she puts her raw milk in her milk steamer, she throws in one of the cacao butter pastilles so it whips up with it. I tried that. Oh my word. It's nice. So good. It's
Sometimes
so
I
good.
put it in my drinks. It's nice, isn't it?
So there you go. A little snack for later.
we could go on for a long time. We have fat.
I know.
The sequel, in fact, the sequel possibly. Okay,
so continuing story.
Go and head over to the Patreon feed if you want to nose into that Crisco book and to see the recipes that we've made into a PDF for you. And we shall be back with another episode soon. Thank you ever so much, Andrea.
We will. All right. Thanks, Alison. Good chatting. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much for listening. We'd love to continue the conversation. Come find us on Instagram. Andrea's at Farm and Hearth and Alison's at ancestral_kitchen. Until next time, we both wish you much fun, exploration, and satisfaction in and out of the kitchen.